My name is Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Community Engagement Manager at the Haley Public Library. Tonight's talk is Preservation of Place, Why Leave No Trace Matters. We'll learn from SNRA's Bear Food Storage Coordinator, Lara Antonello, how visitors to public lands may unknowingly impact wildlife and wildfires, plus tips for preserving its wild character. And it is my pleasure to introduce Lara. Lara has a BS in wildlife biology of terrestrial animals from the University of Montana. She has worked with migratory birds, birds of prey, plants, and bears. She originally came to the Sawtooth Valley while working with Idaho Department of Fish and Game on an elk forage analysis study, identifying plants and analyzing samples in a lab for nutrient contents and how they affect elk pregnancy rates. In 2018, she started working for the Sawtooth Mountain Guides as a winter hut keeper and was a full-time hiking and backpacking guide during the summer prior to starting working with the U.S. Forest Service. Currently, she is the Bear Food Storage Coordinator at the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. And I'm so glad you could join us here tonight, Lara. I think this is going to be a very informative talk. And just to let folks know that this talk will be edited lightly, put titles on the front and back, and then we'll be uploading it to our website tomorrow or maybe on Monday, and include any extra resources that Lara mentions during her talk. So I'll send an email out with the link to that video and any resources that she mentions when I send the link out to the video. So thank you very much, Lara, and take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. So thank you for that introduction. As you already said, today's talk is entitled The Preservation of Place, and my name is Lara Antonello. So today's talk, as was already sort of mentioned, aims to sort of look at the way that the different ways that we as land users and recreators play a role in the landscapes that we participate in, right? Whether you're hiking or just living near wild lands and public lands, you are participating in those landscapes. And so I just think it's really important to recognize that we play a role in that, and that we have a choice whether that role is positive or negative. And that I firmly believe that all of this landscape and all of the flora and fauna on it rely on our unwavering stewardship every day. And so my goal with this talk is to sort of give you some tools to look through how you participate in this landscape. We're going to use Leave No Trace as a framework to sort of talk through that. And then afterward, you can sort of, after we go through those things, you would be able to sort of look at what your roles are, and if you want to adjust anything, or if you need new ideas of how to be a little bit more of a positive player, and just sort of to empower us all to feel a little bit in control of our own effects on the places that we love, when it can be a little bit overwhelming as visitation increases and, you know, wildfires are large and all these things. So just to have a hopeful tone overall. And so yeah, we're going to use those Leave No Trace guidelines, and hopefully everyone walks away with some tips and tricks. So thank you all for being here. So as was mentioned, I am the Bear Lady. That is my self-proclaimed title. My official title is as the Bear Food Storage Coordinator. And so what that means, what that fancy long title means, is that 2 years ago, we were able to instate a bear food storage order on the forest. And so that is a rule on the forest meant to protect people and bears, and to limit the negative interactions that can happen between us two species. And it made it a rule so that people have to store their attractants during the busiest months of the summer. And that way we're trying to prevent those negative interactions from happening, prevent a fed bear from becoming a dead bear, and prevent humans from being in danger. And with that, I coordinate all of the education and outreach for that sort of thing, and do all of the bear aware education on the forest, which is why I shortened the title to the Bear Lady for, for the purpose of conversation. And so, as was mentioned, I am the Bear Lady for the SNRA. And so I think it's really important to always realize where you are and think of things in the connected scale of ecosystems. And so we're going to focus on the Sawtooth National Forest and specifically on the Sawtooth National Recreation Area today, because that is my area of expertise. But as far as all these things can be applied, all the things that we're going to be talking about can be applied to other places that you're going. But a lot of the examples that you're going to see are going to be from the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. And just to sort of get us all in the same mental space, like I said, I think it's really important to be aware of where you are in a landscape. And so this is a tiny map, but a map nonetheless of the SNRA, that darker green section. There's two different shades of darker green. But just to sort of remind you that the red line that's moving through the center of that map that goes from the top left corner down to the bottom right, and then again over to the top right, that's the highway that takes you either northeast to Chalice, south to the Wood River Valley, or west to Boise.
Excuse me, Laura, but for some reason, none of your images are showing.
Interesting. They're all showing on mine.
Yeah, we haven't seen one of them yet, so.
I wonder.
There you go. Now that did it.
Interesting. Let me just reshare. What is that? Can you still see them?
Yes, now we can see them, but we did miss the charming picture of you in front of the lake, and I am very sorry for that.
It's all good. Do you see that one now?
No, I don't.
Oh, shoot. Weird.
Yeah.
Well, we will figure it out.
But we did see, no, here there's a real delay in the pictures loading, apparently.
Okay, that's all fine. Rural Wi-Fi in Stanley is what it is. So either way, can you see the map at this point?
We can see the map, so you might want to talk about it again, just because we didn't have the benefit of the map when you were talking.
Totally. So just quick recap. We are that darker green section that includes two shades of darker green. And that just designates or delineates those different shades of green, delineate the different forests, and then the wilderness areas and our front country areas. Most of the work I do is in the front country areas, the darkest green that you see on the map. And again, just a reminder that this valley that has our beautiful and beloved Salmon River flowing through it is sort of in this crossroads between if you were to head northeast from the valley to Chalice, south to the Wood River Valley, or west to Boise around the Cape Horn Bend. So just to sort of bring you to where we are. And if you're not seeing the photos, just let me know and I can try to close out and reopen, but otherwise I'll just be as descriptive and vivid as possible.
The picture popped up immediately.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to understand why we're having this conversation. And so the Sawtooth NRA is a really special landmass. I mentioned our beloved Salmon River. And so the reason the SNRA was designated is because of the really, really important and critical spawning and rearing habitat we have for endangered salmon species. And so it's always important to remember that. And with being a national recreation area, we do have a special designation in that we're not quite a national park, but we're a little above or more complex, if you will, than just your traditional national forest area. And so the national recreation area aspect means that while we are managing for sensitive salmon habitat, we are also managing for wildlife, other wildlife species like my bears. We're managing for recreation opportunities, whether that's on foot or on dirt bikes or ATVs or horses. Again, that's spawning habitat. We're managing for scenic values. We're managing for resource extraction. We do have timber harvests and things of that nature. And so just remembering that that NRA designation makes us a little bit more complex. And so when we're thinking about the role we play in the landscape, we're fitting ourselves into this already complex thing. And so also it's important to note that these complexities are also like, that's our baseline, right? We already have all these things we're trying to balance. And then now we have, over the recent years and over the recent decade, increased visitation that was definitely amplified in the wake of the pandemic. And then managing for just like this unique destination with all of these unique features. And so as climate change changes things and our ecosystems have a little bit more to face, I just think this topic is really important, and it's important to continually, over the years to come, keep analyzing the role that you're playing in the landscapes you love. On to our next slide. And so with that, again, just really, really want to empower everyone here today that we have control over our actions on this landscape, and we have control over the example that we're setting for our peers and for the people around us. And I just think that that's so awesome, and that it's a really amazing opportunity every time we go for a hike, every time we park our car to go to a trailhead, every time we camp, to be this example of what we want to see on the landscape also. So yeah, we're going to talk through these 7 principles of Leave No Trace, and use that as our framework for our conversation today.
So your image did not come up this time.
All right, no worries. And I can always email the PowerPoint out as well, so not a big deal.
Okay.
But yes, I have pretty pictures in here, so I'm sorry you don't get.
You sure do. I know. They were lovely. Are lovely pictures.
The photo on this one is of some really, really beautiful tiny alpine flowers that I saw blooming in the white clouds this June. So I'll be sure to send it along. So this next slide is our Leave No Trace slide, or Leave No Trace introduction, because we are using this as our framework, so we have to identify what it is. So Leave No Trace is a series of guidelines that is derived from land management agencies. So that includes the Forest Service or other agencies, depending on where you are. And it also depends on like the public land users and what they're seeing out there as well. And the goal of Leave No Trace is to educate and prevent land degradation. And so that's probably what we all want to see today, right? Like when we go out to our favorite place, our favorite little site by the creek, our favorite trail, we don't want to see them getting degraded over time. And we want people to continue to enjoy these places and advocate for them. So we need lots of people to care about them and experience these places, but we just don't want to see them degrade. And because that decreases everyone's experience, right? And it also can be kind of catastrophic for our ecosystem. And so just remembering that this is a set of guidelines used to prevent that degradation. But as with everything, this slide is all about nuance. So as with everything, there is nuance. I cannot stress that enough with Leave No Trace, especially because it is a series of guidelines. These are not end all be all set in stone rules that like apply to every situation perfectly. Leave No Trace is a series of guidelines that we can learn from, and that are applicable guidelines that hold value and are helpful, but they don't fit every person or situation or experience perfectly. Some examples of nuance that we really need to just be considerate of and kind of help you start thinking in that nuanced way is with geotagging. Like for example, on social media, if you like associate a GPS coordinate with a location that you took a photo or posted a photo of. While a lot of people see that as bad, if no one is sharing these things, then it is a form of gatekeeping that prevents a lot of communities from experiencing these things or experiencing these beautiful places or potentially finding these beautiful places if their communities don't have the resources that, let's say, you know, Sun Valley Community School does, where like kids are learning how to go on backpacking trips when they're in 6th grade. Which is amazing. And I wish everyone had that. And so it's just important to realize like geotagging has pluses and minuses. Group size, right? Pluses and minuses. I go out for solitude, but I've definitely patrolling on the forest ran into families who are having family reunions. And that's not a bad thing. That's just what they're going into these places for. And there are good ways to go in as groups and have those community experiences. And there are also good ways to go out there as just an individual trying to seek solitude. So acknowledging that all of those things are unique in that way. Hiking off trail, there are ways to do that in a way that doesn't damage sensitive ecosystems. There are ways to do that that are respectful to the landscape, but it's always tough if you're in sensitive ecosystems or in high use areas, things of that nature. Just again, pluses and minuses, right? We all knew last year, right? You wanted to give people 6 feet of space. So you were stepping off trail to give people space. And again, pluses and minuses. There's nuance to these things. Plant harvesting, there's a lot of indigenous communities who practice their traditional harvesting methods, and their ability to harvest those plants is so important to their culture and to their societies and to their family groups. And it's really important to acknowledge that like their use of that has that positive impact, right? Like they are so tied to these landscapes. But people who, you know, are just maybe not aware of sensitive species or harvest plants in a way that prevents them from continuing growth, you know, those sorts of things can have those negative effects. And so again, just pluses and minuses, all of those topics could be their own presentation. And so I won't spend too much more time on them, but just remembering that there's nuance to this. And I needed to preface with that so that we could have a really good conversation moving forward. So this brings us to our first principle, plan ahead and prepare. So the goal of plan ahead and prepare is essentially you go out, you have your adventure, and you make it back to your car safely. And along the way, you have a good experience and you were safe the whole time, right? Planning ahead and preparing it includes, you know, knowing the weather and making sure that you're considering all the variables that you could potentially face. I don't know if you can see this photo, but my dog is using a map as a dog bed. And unfortunately, he does not know how to read maps. He does not know how to use the internet. So I'm forced to do all of the planning ahead and preparing for our trips. And that's super great because I love that sort of thing. And it's something I got to do a lot as a guide. So I'm super passionate about this leave no trace step because I think it's one of the simplest ways that we can be the best participants in our landscapes and have a safe journey. And so the following slides are going to have a series of questions that I use to sort of figure out how I'm going to plan ahead and prepare for my next adventure. And so with this one, will I be in bear country? You know, I had to do that because I'm the bear lady. And so here on the SNRA, yes, we do have bears. Yes, we have a food storage order. So if I'm backpacking, I'm going to use a bear hang. If I'm car camping, I'm going to put my food in my car. Easy. Are there fire restrictions? For example, here we have our stage 1 fire restrictions, so no campfires, with the exception of we pay for feed campgrounds with a camp host. Are there leash laws? Right now in the Sawtooth Wilderness, we are in our leash law time where pets are required to be on a leash due to the busyness and to prevent harassment of wildlife and help protect those species who are back there roughing it in those mountains. And so if I'm in the Sawtooth, I know I have to have my hiking leash for my dog. Is there a camping or parking stay limit? On the SNRA, we have that 10-day occupancy limit across the forest, so I can enjoy my site for up to 10 days, and then I got to bump somewhere else. Are there road closures, trail closures, camping closures? Will I need a permit, whether it's at a ranger station or self-issue at the trailhead? Moving on to our next slide, is the area that I'm going to be sensitive or high use? So that's like, you know, your Redfish Canyon, everything beyond there, I would consider high use and sensitive because there's the watershed and it connects to salmon habitat. It's high use because Redfish is a very beautiful, popular destination. And the canyon beyond gets a lot of traffic because it is such an easy access with that boat, with the boat shuttle. And so that's going to determine how I deal with my human waste and how I time my adventure and how I plan my trip. I don't know if you can see this photo, but it's a photo of when I was working for Idaho Fish and Game. I am hiking in the Sawtooth for my veg surveys, and I was with my supervisor, and it started snowing. It was a glorious, beautiful day, mid-July, and there are big snowflakes in that photo. And so what will the weather forecast be during my trip? Anytime I go hiking in the Sawtooth, even if it's been as hot as it's been, I always have a rain jacket and I always have an extra layer, whether that's like just a long sleeve shirt or a puffy if it's going to be colder, things of that nature. Just anything that would keep me safe and prevent me from getting too cold or anything like that when I'm out on my adventures. What wildlife should I be aware of, right? Like if you're in areas that have rattlesnakes or mountain lions, things like that. And what is my emergency plan? I always let somebody know where I'm going because that's something I'm in control of, right? All of these questions are things I'm in control of. I am in control of if I have a jacket, and if it starts snowing, which is out of my control, then all of a sudden I'm prepared. And that plan ahead and prepare is in action, right? And having an emergency plan, I think, is just so important. Every single year, I have a ton of friends who work on the ambulance here in Stanley, and every single year between the ambulance and search and rescue, people are getting injured or even dying in these mountains because they didn't have an emergency plan, right? They got hurt too far back and they had no way to reach help, or they were somewhere that they didn't know where they were and they fell and weren't able to get help that way. Nobody knew where they were, things of that nature. So again, that plan ahead and prepare. I'm in control of how I prepare for things and how I plan ahead. What happens when I'm out there? Things definitely do and can continue to go wrong. But if I do as many things as I can to plan ahead and prepare, then I'm going to set myself up to get back to my car at the end of the day. So just really important. So hopefully that gets you thinking about different questions you might ask. Next, our next principle, our next guideline from Leave No Trace is to travel and camp on durable surfaces. This is a photo in the white clouds from this past season. As you can see, there's not a lot of snow. And so our alpine vegetation is exposed. It's in that growing period. Their season in the alpine is so short to grow. And so in this photo, a friend of mine is walking on the trail. That was how we decided to travel on durable surfaces. Trails are a great option. We were traveling through a sensitive ecosystem, so we stuck to that trail and just rode it the whole way. This photo, as I said, travel and camp on durable surfaces is pretty self-explanatory, right? That principle has the goal of maintaining these sensitive places and maintaining the natural aspects of these places we like to go visit by funneling everyone onto these durable surfaces. And so if you can see this photo, I have my work truck parked on the road. So it's on that lighter colored dirt. It's on the road, which is a durable surface. And everything to the right in that photo are vehicles that are parked on vegetation. And it even looks like it's just dirt at this point. And if you look closer to the trees, you'll see where cars haven't been able to drive. You'll see there's still some tall vegetation left. So that's what that whole area used to be. So all of those cars drove off the road, off of that durable surface, and parked to try to fit at the Iron Creek Trailhead during a busy day. Probably, I think it was in July was when I took this photo. And they did not travel on those durable surfaces, and as a result, that vegetation is trampled. It is dust in the front, and it is very stubby dead grass in the back. And even during our high fire danger times, it's super sketchy to park your cars on tall vegetation like that, or even when it's short, because your hot engine, you don't realize how hot the bottom of your car can be. And that can make a really bad situation for everyone. And so this is just an example of, these people really wanted to go for this hike, which I totally understand. And it's really frustrating when you get to a trailhead, but that plan ahead and prepare, you can have alternate routes, right? If you get to a busy trailhead and it's full, move somewhere else because you'll have a plan B because you planned ahead and you prepared. And that set you up for success in this travel on durable surfaces thing. A lot of these folks, I'm sure, had they really wanted to go to Sawtooth Lake, which is a gorgeous, wonderful spot. But as a result, not just them, but everyone who followed those car tracks throughout the season and then leading up to these people made it so that this durable surface, or made it so that this is now an area people perceive as parking. And it's really hard to rehab these things, and it takes a lot of energy and effort and resources. And so it's something we'll have to look at moving forward. But what I would do, like I said, is have that plan B and go to that less populated trailhead. That's how I would control how I would participate in this situation. So moving on to our next principle, dispose of waste properly. This principle has the goal of maintaining our ecosystems in a healthy way, and also maintaining these areas that are used by other people in a sanitary way. So preventing degradation through yuckiness, essentially, is the goal of this principle. If you can see the photo on the left, it is me cleaning up the outlaw poop of somebody who used the surface of the ground as a bathroom, unfortunately, and then proceeded to leave their toilet paper on top of the surface. And so this is an example of not disposing of waste properly, in case anyone was wondering. But yes, this is not what we want. And so something I would do in that situation if I were me is I would drive to an outhouse if it was a real emergency and I didn't have any way to dig a hole. I would dig an appropriate cat hole 200 feet away from water and at least 6 inches deep and then fully buried and pack my toilet paper out. Or I would use a wag bag, which we'll talk about more, but essentially just a rest stop bag that is for packing out your human waste. And they're puncture resistant. Don't totally push that limit, but they are puncture resistant, which is awesome. And they're just a really good tool for disposing of human waste properly. So that's one aspect. But then there's also with our trash and waste. We've probably all shown up to a campsite where things got pretty messy, right? People left their trash, a bunch of ground squirrels shredded the bag and like drug everything around, or people, fell asleep in their hammock when their like dinner was still out and critters just like dispersed all that stuff. And so it's just really important to dispose of our waste properly if we want to maintain these places. As with the human waste, we can really contaminate water sources. And you see that especially in the backcountry. It adds up a lot, right? If everyone who goes to Sawtooth Lake does what happened to me having to deal with it in that left photo, if everyone goes to the bathroom on the surface there, or even if they're burying it, but not deep enough, then that can really contaminate those water sources and negatively affect everyone who goes there after you. And with the trash, a bear-proof dumpster, like as in this photo, is not bear-proof if the trash is on the outside, right? So what I would have control over in that situation is I would see that trash on the outside and I would take my stuff elsewhere. If I had room or a truck, maybe I'd take a couple bags, be a good Samaritan. But with my own stuff, dealing with my role that I'm playing on the landscape, I would move on and find a different dumpster that wasn't overflowing. And if you got there and you opened the hatch and it was full, count it out, right? Just that's your cue to change your role and have that positive impact and just take your trash to a different location or bring it all the way home. So this is a bear-proof dumpster that is being used properly. I opened it when I was there. This is out at the Redfish Inlet campground. I opened it when I was there. It was only half full. Nothing was on the outside and I was very happy. And the bear lady in me was just glowing. I was so stoked. Everyone was doing what they were supposed to there. And just the bottom line is with your waste, when in doubt, just pack it out. You don't want to if you feel like maybe it's kind of pushing the limit, it probably is, right? You're probably risking making an unsanitary situation, whether it has to do with trash or waste. So just when in doubt, pack it out. Next, moving on to leave what you find. This principle, I think, is so special and something that I struggle with sometimes as somebody who loves rocks. So leave what you find aims to sort of preserve a shared experience, right? If I see a beautiful thing, the way I kind of look at this whole principle is if I see something that just totally is inspiring or beautiful or just was like the coolest thing I've ever seen, it would be super sad if I was the last person to experience that feeling. And so when it comes to whether it's the 6-sided quartz crystal that was on the left photo or potentially an indigenous artifact that's in the middle photo here, or the right photo. It's just really important to remember that other people do come across these things, even if you feel like you're in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere where no one's ever been. Other people do see these things. And so leaving what you find is a really awesome way to sort of pay that beautiful experience forward to whoever is lucky enough to stumble across it. And so the photo on the left is in the Sawtooth. It is in the Redfish Canyon, and I was hiking along and I saw these beautiful flowers and I looked down in this crevice just because I was amazed at how they were precariously growing out of this rock. And when I looked down into this little crevice, these 6-sided quartz crystals were shoving out of the rock. And a really easy option, I mean, it wouldn't have been easy, but I could have opted to try to break those off and take them home, right? Have that lucky little trinket. But instead, I opted to take a photo and use my thumb for scale. And that was my opportunity to play that positive role and to leave what I find so that maybe whoever walks that area, maybe they'll be so lucky to look down in that same spot and be totally floored by how something that beautiful and that amazing can form naturally. So that's just one way of looking at that. In the second photo here, there's this kind of purpley blue, sort of chipped, technicolored looking rock. And this was in southern Utah. I was in an area with a lot of indigenous history. So when I saw this amongst all of the red sandstone everywhere, I had not seen anything like this in the desert before. And so it immediately sort of perked me up to, maybe this is special in a way that's more than just, oh, this is a cool rock. Like maybe there's something more with this. And either way, I was so amazed by it. I took a photo, and of course the photo didn't fully do it justice, but I was amazed by it. So I took this photo and I placed it back where it was, and then carried on with my hike. And later on, I did some more research and I started reading and coming across articles about how sometimes you'll find these little mosaics in the desert where there's all these broken little shards of Technicolor rock, essentially. And those are broken indigenous things, whether they're arrowheads or pieces of other tools or, pots or stuff like that. And a lot of those rocks made their way to these areas via trade between different tribes across the West and elsewhere. And so what I found was likely something that had a lot of indigenous history, which is probably why I was so awe-inspired. But again, I just took that photo, set it back down, and hopefully somebody will walk that slick rock zone that I was in and get to experience that same really beautiful thing. And then the last thing with leave what you find is, again, you're trying to leave things better than you found it, right? Every time I camp anywhere, I'm picking up a couple pieces of trash that even if they're not mine, right? Because I always have my trash in my trash bag in my car. But if I'm in the backcountry, even, I'm always hiking random things that I find out because I'm trying to leave it better than I found it in that regard. And with campsites, I'm camping where it's already smushed down, right? To protect those plant ecosystems and to sort of use those more durable surfaces that are already smushed down to lessen my impact. And something I really liked that the Leave No Trace website said, they had a quote that in this section that said, consider the idea that good campsites are found and not made. So if you're smushing down tall grass to pitch your tent, you're making a campsite, you're not finding one. But if you're going to an area that's, a slab up next to a lake, that rock surface is super durable. And that's a super great option because you found an area that's super durable and that you can leave better than you found it. Moving on to our next principle, minimizing campfire impacts. So this one is so critically important. I know I feel like I've said that at least twice at this point. A lot of this stuff is really important, but campfire impacts, this principle, I just cannot express how important it is enough. Most of us, I would imagine, live along these wild lands, live in areas where wildfire could come toward our homes and could put people or places that we love in danger. And so I just think this principle is trying to get people to acknowledge that, yes, there was a time where fire was a necessity for humans and where it was necessary for cooking. But now we don't need these fires, right? Yes, they make for a pleasant camp experience, but we have stoves now, right? We have these sweet little pocket rockets. We have, the stove in our Sprinter van, all these things that make it so we don't have to burn these areas or burn these pits and sort of sterilize these little zones where plants can't grow because the soil's been so charred. And so I think it's just really important to acknowledge that the role we play in this one is that if we use stoves, that is already such a simple way that we're helping the area that we're recreating in. And that if we are only having fires in areas where they've been had, like in a fire ring or whether, in our little fire blanket or fire pan, things that aren't going to negatively affect the soil, because that heat does sterilize things. I know that after a fire, that nutrient cycle is really important, but when you're burning something in one place regularly and consistently, it can cause damage to an ecosystem. And so this photo, if you can see it, is of a fire ring out in the Pettit Lake area in the dispersed camping. It's super white and ashy, which is usually a red flag to me where I should go put my palm in it and see if it's too hot. And I sure as heck put my hand in it and had to immediately pull my hand back because it was an unattended and abandoned campfire that somebody was having. It took me about, I think, 10 gallons to put this one out because it was so hot and the coals were still so red underneath that white ash. And luckily, the burnt pieces of wood you see outside of the fire ring were not on fire because that would have been super dangerous near some of the vegetation. But clearly somebody had been burning those and put them out of the fire at some point, which is just a risky move. So just having very respectable and conscious fires, right? Like thinking about the connectivity and where we are. The way I sort of always think about it and the way that I can participate in a positive way is like, I love this place that I'm in and I don't want to make myself have to leave by having a careless spark start a fire and then cause an evacuation. And so that's kind of how I think of it, is like, I want to have a safe time here. And so I'm not going to have a fire because I don't want to risk it. And hopefully other people sort of adopt that same mentality. And so this sort of brings us into a good way to sort of manage our campfires also is, as you heard me say in the last slide, I put my hand in that hot ash and had to pull back immediately. And so that's the field part of our drown, stir, and feel to make sure our campfires are out. And if I drown it out with a bunch of water and I stir it with my shovel or a stick, and then I put my hand in it and I can leave my hand in those coals, that means it's out. But if it's still too hot and I have to pull away because it's burning, then you got to keep going until it's done. So just a reminder to use that little drown, stir, feel, that little sort of rhythmic process, 3-step process to just make sure your campfires are out. And just get those hands in those coals. The photo on the left is another unattended campfire I found this season. Big chunks of wood, big chunks of embers that could have carried. And that one also took about 10 gallons to put out. So just remembering to be prepared. That's part of your plan ahead and prepare. If you do plan to have a fire, you need to have a bucket and a shovel to put those things out. A good option for minimizing your campfire impacts is using an established fire ring where there are. The bottom right photo is a fire ring that was installed in Iron Creek by 2 of my wonderful bear stewards with the Environmental Resource Center. And that's a super great way. I inhaled a speck. I'm gonna take a sip of water. There we go. That's a really great way to make sure you're containing your fire and that you're having a small enough one, and to make sure that you're not damaging other areas within the campground or preventing, vegetation from growing in places. And that just concentrates that use, right? A lot of these things, same with traveling on durable surfaces, we're concentrating the use so that the rest of the landscape can be exactly what we need it to be and what the ecosystem needs it to be. So we can't talk about campfires without talking about wildfires. And so I was reading, there's an insurance company that deals a lot with houses in wildland urban interfaces. So that's everything in Stanley and almost all of the Wood River Valley I would consider a wildland urban interface. And so that insurance agency company had a statistic on the website in the slide that said that as many as 90% of wildfires in the United States are caused by people. And that, they said, they got from the Department of the Interior. And so some of those human causes are campfires that are unattended, which is why we have our fire restrictions and fire bans, the burning of debris, downed power lines, cigarettes, and acts of arson. And then the remaining 10% are lightning starts and from lava. We don't really have volcanoes here, but we do have a lot of lightning, and you've probably experienced that a lot with these storms. We've had a number of lightning started fires, even though it's been raining a bunch. And so it's important to remember that even depending on what your weather conditions are, it's easy to think that with that rain, that it's safe to have these fires now. But really, like, what did we experience all summer, right? We had a dry June. It was super hot. And so the fuels in the forest are really dry, even with this rain. And it's not a significant enough wetting event to change the risk of fire. And so just realizing that humans play 90% of the role in the wildfires that happen. And just, if I want to control my role in the landscape, and if I want to have a positive one, I'm going to avoid a campfire. especially in the heat of summer. It's just not, it's nice sometimes, but there are other options for that, right? Paying for a feed campground where it's allowed because it's concrete and there's water tanks with the camp hosts. Another option is those propane ones that look really beautiful and do put off a lot of heat, which is nice. But then that chance of that careless spark goes away. So that's just something I always consider. And if you're backpacking, I will just really quick say my favorite thing for staying warm is never ever a campfire when I'm backpacking. It's boiling water and putting it in my Nalgene water bottle and making sure that lid is on nice and tight, and then putting it in a sock and then putting it in my sleeping bag as a little space heater. So if you didn't know that one, we call it snuggling a hottie. And if you didn't know that one, that's probably my favorite trick. And so you don't even need a campfire to stay warm while you're backpacking, as long as you have your stove. These 3 photos, if you can see them, are from wildfires that I have personally been on. The one on the left was a lightning start, and that was in the wilderness. And then the one in the middle was the Trap Creek fire from last year. That one is an unknown start that was directly next to the Trap Creek campground. So we can... At this time, I'm just going to say, if a fire started next to a campground, who do you think started it? And so just something to think about, right? Like, what role are we playing in the landscape? And then the one on the right, it was also a lightning start fire. And so fire is important to our ecosystems, but the scale and rate at which it's happening right now is being sort of amplified by humans. And I just really like to consider the role I can play in that. So the last bit on the wildfire stuff is, according to the Drought Monitor, as of July 13th, 95% of land in the Western US is experiencing moderate to severe drought. And so when I was in fire school getting my recertifications this spring, the meteorologist who talked to us was saying we are 45 days ahead of schedule, and that has remained true. So just remembering you play a role. And so when it is legal to have campfires, make sure you're fully drowning them, stirring them, and feeling them by putting your hands in those coals. And when there's fire restrictions and full fire bans, making sure that you're really adhering to those rules. And then checking anytime you go anywhere else. Because the whole West is in a drought, and it's just one of those things that you can really show a lot of respect for a place by looking up those regulations. So next, probably my favorite guideline is respecting wildlife. My background in wildlife biology started with butterflies, so I had to throw a butterfly photo in there. This butterfly was licking up all the little salt next to a hot spring on the main Salmon River. And then on the left, those are some wolf tracks I came across in 2017 in the Sawtooths. And so just remembering, we are animals, and so is every animal on the landscape. And we are all connected in this really, really intricate ecosystem. And so the respect wildlife principle really aims to get at making sure that we are giving wildlife space, that we're not negatively impacting their survival, that we're not negatively impacting their reproduction, that we're not negatively affecting their ability to get food, that we're not negatively affecting their ability to get water. So anything that animals need to live, we're respecting those aspects of their life, which is why I think it's super important and awesome to be curious about the animals in your area, because I know that just watching birds out my window, I've learned so many things about the different species around the valley, when they show up, what their reproductive cycles are. And so it's just really, it's a really unique way to be able to participate in the landscape, respecting wildlife from afar, giving them space, and just admiring them for what they are, because it's pretty amazing that they survive every day without, coffee in the morning and a roof over their head and a car to get them to work. They're out there, they're foraging, they're hunting, they're denning up, they're dealing with our 40 below winter days. And I just think that they deserve a lot of respect and admiration. And one really, really easy way to respect wildlife is to respect their habitat. And so the next slide just points out that in order to respect wildlife, we are respecting their habitat. We're respecting the areas that they need to survive. So the photo on the right is of somebody who carved their initials into a tree at the Redfish Overflow campground. And this always makes me really sad because trees are more susceptible to diseases when their bark is affected like that. And trees provide a lot of habitat, and they also provide us shade, right? Places to hang our hammocks. But they provide a lot of habitat, especially for birds, their root systems for a lot of insects, and just a lot of animals use them as part of their survival strategies. And so one way to respect these critters is to make sure we're taking care of the things they need, and that includes trees. Because I'm the bear lady, I know you guys are no longer shocked by this, but I always have to advocate for our bear friends. And one way to respect our bears here is to follow the bear food storage order, right? If we are storing our attractants, we are preventing bears from getting habituated. Habituated is when bears get used to something, and specifically in a human relationship, it means that they get used to humans and their trash and their food as a food source. So bears are eating all the time, and they have to get fat for hibernation or else they won't survive, because they quite literally will die if they do not have a high enough fat store going into winter. And so they're trying to get the maximum food for the minimum effort. And that trash bag hanging in this tree in the photo on the left is such an easy option for them. This is an unattended campground, unattended bear attractants that I came across last year, I believe out at Stanley Lake. And so just realizing that if we're respecting these animals, that means we're going to make sure that we don't result in their death, that our presence on the landscape doesn't cause them to die. Because the reality is a fed bear is a dead bear, because if a bear becomes emboldened to try to get these human food sources, there's a tent in the background of the photo on the left that has a cooler right at the entryway. And if a bear were to ransack that in the night and a person were to spook them, they might become territorial and attack the person over that food because they're territorial over their food source, right? Or they got startled by the person who's way too close for comfort. And so that bear would end up getting euthanized by Fish and Game, because it is also our duty as public servants with the Forest Service and with the state to protect the public. And so it puts us in a horrible spot, it puts the bears in a horrible spot, and it puts you in a very dangerous situation. So just knowing that if you're respecting the habitat that animals need to survive, then you're respecting the wildlife too. And that's just it's a beautiful thing, and it's my favorite thing because animals are my favorite. And so, yeah. This one I think is really important as well. Shocking, they're all important. But this principle is to be considerate of other visitors. And so I'm sure we can all think of a time in our heads where, such and such a camper on the road we were on was being really noisy, or such and such a camper was really rude, or such and such a camper left things trashed, and then I showed up at the site and was bummed out. And so being considerate of other visitors, for me, is just acknowledging that my actions are going to affect the person who comes after me. And that's especially true with bear attractants, things like that, with that habituation, right? Like a bear is going to keep coming back to the same site, whether you're there or not, because they've been trained that zone might have food. And being considerate of other visitors, I just think, is an important way to really acknowledge that nuance that we started to talk about, that other people have different ways they want to experience the land, and I have different ways I want to experience the land. And I think it's really important to consider how my actions are affecting other people. And if it's negatively impacting their safety or their happiness, then I'm probably going to refrain from some stuff. And the Leave No Trace website had a really awesome quote that said that being considerate of other visitors is to thoroughly consider how your experience is affecting the way someone else enjoys the outdoors. And so on the SNRA, because that is my area of expertise, like I said, that bear food storage order is a really easy way to be considerate of other visitors, because you're taking care of everyone who comes after you, and you're taking care of all of the wildlife. One way to be considerate is also to manage my human waste properly. So using those wag bags and sensitive areas in the backcountry or even in the front country, and using an outhouse and not being an outlaw pooper because it makes Lara sad. Another great way to be considerate is to obey the fire restrictions where you are, because we want to protect these areas and we want to make sure that we keep other visitors, including ourselves, safe, because if we have to evacuate anywhere, it's a super serious ordeal. It's so dangerous. And like, just thinking about how many people are in Redfish, for example, right now, if a fire were to be happening, that's thousands of people that have to get moved out safely. And that's fire crews that are put at risk. That's just like a situation we always want to avoid. And so being considerate by following those fire restrictions is such an easy and wonderful option. And another way to be considerate of other visitors is to follow different occupancy limits that the forest has wherever you're going. And the reason these occupancy limits are important, and I know sometimes, as a guide who used to have to camp a lot for housing, as or former guide, I should say, I understand how it's tempting to stay at a site for a long time if it's your favorite site or if it's a busy weekend and you hit 9 days but you wanted to stay for 3 more, and how it'd be really easy if you just stayed and hopefully the ranger won't notice, and you might get away with that, but you're not allowing for other opportunities for other visitors, right? If you are holding a site for a really long time or you're camping somewhere beyond an occupancy limit, you're preventing other people from enjoying that space as well. And so I like to use occupancy limits as a way to sort of find new places on whatever forest I'm recreating on. And it's like, okay, so I stayed here for, 9 out of 10 days and it's a Thursday. So I want to move today before the crowds come in on Friday. So I'm going to go to this random road I've never driven on that's highlighted on the map as being for dispersed camping. And I'm going to see what I find. And 9 times out of 10, I find something really awesome. So just using it as an exercise, and being considerate of other visitors by sharing these areas so that, especially in the high use zones that are like, close to the lakes, everyone wants to be by the lake. And so just making sure we're allowing for other opportunities so that we get to enjoy places when we want to, and no one else is hogging it when we want it, and also not being the one to hog it when other people want it. And again, just remembering that nuance, right? People have different goals when they go into these wild and natural places. And it's really important to acknowledge that our way isn't the only way, and that different cultures and different, like backgrounds and different economic statuses are going to have you enjoying these spaces in a different way. And that these guidelines are such an awesome tool for us to sort of examine how we participate in the landscape and what sort of tools we have in our little toolkit to be the best stewards we want to be, but also acknowledging that other people have different ways of doing things, and that's totally okay, and that there's a lot to learn from everyone. So
hey Laura, we actually have a question.
Totally.
Could you talk a little bit more specifically about how to store food safely regarding the bear storage order?
Yes, I totally can. I would love to. I'd be honored. So with our bear food storage order, it's pretty simple. So if you're car camping or have a trailer, any hard-sided trailer or vehicle or structure, so if you're staying in a cabin or if you live in a cabin, anything that is closed and hard-sided is fine. So you can put all of your dirty dishes, your trash, your coolers, your food, your pet food, sunscreen, all those smelly things that might draw a bear toward your camp. All of those things just go into your hard-sided vehicle, structure, or trailer whenever it's unattended or not actively in use. So that's when you're sleeping, when you're gone from camp. Or what I try to explain with imagine if you're down by the river and your camp's 20 yards away or something, even if you can see your camp, if you can't hear what's going on, or if you're taking a nap in your camp chair by the river, you're not attending those attractants. So if you can imagine that a bear would have enough time to ransack something, that's when you should be storing those things. And so those hard-sided vehicles. If you're backpacking, a really great option is a bear hang. And that is my preferred option. So when I was guiding full time, I went down to backwoods and I bought, I think I got 30 feet of rope, because they are required to be at least 10 feet off the ground and 4 feet away from the tree. So if you have your rope and you imagine it draped over a tree branch, that's supposed to be 10 feet up and 4 feet away. And so I got that extra long length so that you could have the 10 feet going up to the branch and the 10 feet coming back down to the ground. So I don't have to like reach and claw into the sky to try to hang my food on the end of the rope. And then you just pull that, hoist it all the way up and tie it off near the tree. Sometimes people are concerned about whether or not a bear is going to try to untie the rope or chew through the rope. But the reality is a bear is focused on food and they're very scent driven. And so the bear is going to smell that food in the bag and focus on that bag. And unless you coated the rope with bacon grease or something crazy, they're not going to notice the rope. And so it's such an easy, nice way to sort of get those things up and out of the way. And not have to stress about it while you're camping way back in the backcountry when your food is super precious, right? If you're on a 5-day backpacking trip, you definitely don't want to lose your food in the middle. So yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about trailers? A lot of people are using like the Coleman pop-up campers that have a hard top, but then canvas sides on them.
Totally. Yeah. So that's why I specified on that hard-sided. So yes or no, can a bear tear through canvas? The answer is yes. And so those are not sufficient for storage. If you have, let's say, a bear-proof certified container is your third option. You got your hard-sided vehicle things, your bear hang, and a certified container. So that's any like a bear canister that you might get in the Tetons if you rented it at the visitor center, or the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee, which I can send the link out, has a PDF list of every certified container. And a really quick fun fact, because it's my favorite. So any certified container by the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee was tested on live grizzly bears in Yellowstone that were habituated bears that got comfortable with human food sources. And instead of being euthanized, they were essentially put into like a wildlife zoo in West Yellowstone, Montana. And people will apply to the IGBC to have their things tested. So Yeti is a popular brand that's bear proof. And they apply anytime they have a new model, they apply to have it tested. And the people at the IGBC will stuff that full of all the yummiest, smelliest attractants. And then they latch it up appropriately with bolts in the corners and those rubber latches down and secured in place. And then they put it in there with the bear, and the bear has an hour to access it or to damage it enough that they would be able to access it. And if they don't get into it or damage it enough, then it is certified. So the certification is super key because it means it's the real deal. And so one good option if you had those soft-sided campers is if you did have if you had like a Yeti cooler or something and put those bolts in the corners, then it is bear proof. And so what I would do in that situation is put my food in that bear proof container and stuff that a couple of feet away from the camp, just so if it's smelly, a bear's not being drawn toward me. So put all those attractants in that container and put it away. And then your camper is good to go because it's an attractant-free zone. If you don't have that, then I think a bear hang in the front country is totally fine and is your next best option and the cheapest option, right? It's like probably $20 for a carabiner and a rope. So yeah.
So what's a bear hang? Is that like a net bag that you put your food in and then pulley it up?
Yeah, so the bear hang itself is referring to the rope suspending. It's referring to the suspension of your attractants. And so, like I said, that 10 feet off the ground minimum, 4 feet away from the supporting tree minimum. And so I've used a stuff sack where I'll put all my food in the stuff sack and tie it off at the end of a rope and then hoist it up. I've just done my backpack before. Like one time I had like the oil of my peanut butter packet like leaked all over the pocket of my water bottle pocket, and my whole backpack just reeked of peanut butter and was like oily. And so I just didn't want to be snuggling it at all. And I was in the Tetons. I was like, get this away from me. There's grizzly bears and there's black bears. I don't want to deal. And so in that situation, I just fully hung my backpack. And so you can use any bag you have, anything that you can put your stuff in and tow it up with a rope. And I've used grocery bags. I've used literally anything that I can put things in. Yeah. And fasten.
Yeah, last question on this. Where locally can you get those bear canisters?
Ooh, the canister. Well, so none of the visitor centers have them for rent. And if you know of anyone who would be interested in funding that sort of thing, let me know, because I would love to have them available to rent to the public, because it's such an easy option. And I think it'd be cool if the ranger stations had them. And I don't know if I think maybe Elephant's Perch or Backwoods might have, they're called Ursacks, and they're like a bear proof, like satchel essentially. I think they might even be made of like Kevlar. They're like a woven bag that's kind of chew proof. And so they might have those. Otherwise, I've always had to order anything like that online, like the actual canister that fits in your backpack. Otherwise, any of the stores that sell like Orca coolers, Yeti coolers, things like that, which I don't know that there's very many stores that sell that sort of stuff here. I think most of that's in Twin, honestly. And I don't do too much recreational shopping anywhere. So I'm not the best resource for that. But the internet has a lot of options. And like I said, that PDF from the IGBC is where I like look up what models are good to go. Or if I find a cooler, like I'll look up what cooler it is and I decide that I'm going to get that one, and then I cross-reference with that PDF of all the certified containers, and then I get that one because I would like to double dip with that sort of thing.
Okay. And then we also have a question about, I think it's pronounced Ursacks.
Yes.
Ursacks.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how it's spelled. It's a play on the fact that the genus of bear is Ursus, which is Greek for bear. And so, yeah, and it's on that PDF list, so I can make sure to spell that out correctly. Because yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how it's spelled though.
Okay. And are they certified?
Yes, they are certified.
Okay.
And those are super good. I really like them, especially for like squirrels and chipmunks, because most times that I have been ransacked in the backcountry, like the only times I've ever been ransacked in the backcountry have been by those little buddies, because I always am hanging my stuff. But if I'm like prepping dinner or something and there's a really habituated ground squirrel in the area, it'll just run up while I'm cooking and start eating out of the corner of my bag. And so I think having that sort of satchel would be super nice for when you could like have everything while you're cooking, like in that bag still, so the little buddies can't get it.
And then Jackie asks, regarding attractants, do you recommend putting dishes in that, dishes like a coffee mug? And how about stove fuel canisters? And what if they can't all fit into a required bear canister?
Totally. So, oh my gosh, so many good questions all at once. So first of all, plan ahead and prepare, right? So that is our tool for like, we are going to have attractants with us because we're going to eat and wherever we're going that has bears. And so one aspect of plan ahead and prepare is making sure that you can fit everything. And I know there have been times where like on backpacking trips guiding, I knew I was going to have so much food that I brought 2 bear hang cords, because I knew that one cord and one tiny branch wasn't going to hold everything, because it was like 150 pounds of food or something like that, for like a 7-day trip with 8 people or something like that. I don't know. It was a lot. It was a lot of food and heavy backpacks. And so part of that plan ahead and prepare is trying to anticipate those things. But I think your best bet is to store. So going to dishes, if the dishes are cleaned and washed with soap and water, they're no longer an attractant. So if you're washing things, then you're good to go. If those dishes are dirty and greasy and still have food on them, or you just like, still have coffee in the bottom of your mug, then those things are not bear proof. They are attractants and they could draw a bear toward you, toward your camp. And so I think an easy option for that is just to make sure you have things to wash those things, whether it's like a little collapsible bucket if you're in the backcountry, or if you're on a long camping trip, stopping somewhere that has water to wash them, or having a dish bin in your van or trailer. So that's one way to deal with that. If they are dirty, then they are an attractant that does need to be stored. And then the fuel canisters. So fuel does have a smell. So in that sense, yes, it is absolutely an attractant. Bears can smell through tin cans. They can smell through those canisters. However, I do think it's important to note that it is not the most important thing to store. So if you are running into that storage issue where you're like, oh man, like my bags and my car, everything is maxed out and I have this little propane thing, I don't know what to do with it. I think a good option for that is to stash it away from your camp. I think one of the rules of thumb I think I've heard is like 100 feet from your camp is where you can put stuff. And so like, again, that's like your cooler if you're trying to get away from your soft-sided camper, or those fuel canisters, things like that, if you don't have room for them, because they aren't an easy access food source, and because they aren't an obvious food source in that regard, and because we don't have frequent reports of bears trying to consume those things in this area. Like most of our stuff that bears are consuming around here are trash, or coolers that are left out, and carcasses that hunters maybe had like left out because they couldn't pack everything up or whatever it was. And so those are the main reports. And so prioritizing, if you're in a pinch and can't store everything for some reason, you will be, if you're in the front country, you will be in violation of the bear food storage order, and you still could have a negative experience with a bear. But if you're trying to prioritize things, putting things 100 feet away from your camp and making sure that it's those non-obvious things like those propane canisters and things like that, all those can go away. And yeah, like I said, we just, the fuel is an attractant by definition because it does have a smell, but it is not something we have frequent reports of bears getting into. So it's not high on my priority list for enforcement or for like risk management when I'm thinking about all the things I have to deal with, like all of my attractants that I'm trying to store. It's just not high on my list because of the frequency and because of the fact that our bears here are skittish and they usually go for trash and for food out of coolers. Yeah.
Great. Oh gosh, I had another question, but somebody asks, what is the likelihood that a grizzly or grizzlies may be found in central Idaho? And then a kind of a corollary question is, any idea how many black bears are in central Idaho?
Awesome questions. So regionally, I don't know the black bear statistic, but I do know the last time I checked IDFG, Idaho Fish and Game's website, I believe I read 30,000 black bears and increasing was the population in the state of Idaho. So we have a super healthy, robust black bear population overall. Regionally, it might vary based on bears getting into trouble and, that euthanization rate stuff, which is why we have this preventative order on the forest. And as far as grizzly bears, the last thing I read from Idaho Fish and Game was that there was the first grizzly bear in like 100 years was confirmed sighted in salmon. So that's sort of the most recent confirmed sighting we've had. The IGBC, who, as I've mentioned them for other stuff, they are part of a grizzly bear recovery program as well, just trying to sort of identify areas of habitat that would be suitable for grizzly bears as part of their historic range, and how those pieces of habitat connect to other areas. And so we are connected by the Frank Church to the Bitterroot Selway Complex, which is part of the recovery zone for grizzly bears. And so I do think that at some point they will make their way back here. And I would imagine, I don't think it would come to reintroduction, but obviously I can't read the future, and it is not something that I'm working on at all because that's all the state, and I'm federal. But when I look at a map and I see how these big islands of wilderness are connected, I just think that if I was a grizzly bear, I would make my way south, because if grizzly bears are more territorial, and they're a little bit bigger and badder as far as how they treat their individuals in an overlapping home range. And so I just think if I didn't want to deal with, grumpy bear who eats all the salmon on that river, I'd move out of that way a little bit. As far as I know, there are no known populations in this area, in the Sawtooth. And like I said, it is part of the historic range. But yeah, I would imagine like the bear that was seen in salmon, that was one bear, right? That's not a breeding population. There's no cubs involved if it's just one individual and it's the only one that's been seen in 100 years or whatever the actual timeline was on that. And so I think it's just important to acknowledge that they can be back here because this was their habitat, and it still is their habitat. They're just not here. And that if we're following these bear food storage rules now, then we're not going to have any issues if they are here, right? If they have no reason to come to our camps because we already have been keeping it spotless for, you know, decades, then we're not going to have problems. And so I worked in the Tetons and in Montana for a really long time in grizzly bear country, and I have a lot of respect for those animals, and they really are beautiful and awe-inspiring if you haven't experienced them before. And if you have, then you probably know. And while they are intimidating, I do appreciate how they sort of, I don't know, they're a big symbol to me of how wild everything really is. And so I think they're a special animal. And even if they're not here, I just think it's important to treat black bears with as much respect as grizzly bears get, because they are just as strong as far as their body size goes. And they are an animal that we are overlapping with regularly, and can still be very dangerous to us if we're not careful. And so, yeah, hopefully that answers the question. But
yeah, I think so. That's all the questions that we have right now. Did you have any additional slides, or was this your last slide?
I think that was the last one. So yeah, yeah, that was the question slide. Pretty wildflowers. Hopefully you can see them. This was this was in July, I think, of 2017, and you can see how much snow is on the mountains, which is not what we have right now.
That's amazing.
It was so cool. But yeah, and then I just wanted to thank you all for coming again. This was such a special opportunity to be able to talk about these things, because every day I'm out and I'm talking to the public and I'm advocating for bears, and oftentimes I'm talking about all the topics that we just went over sort of sporadically, but it's such a cool opportunity to sort of like be with local people who play a part in this valley, who care about this valley, and who are always out on this landscape, and sort of collectively talk about the roles that we can play. And like I said, just really, I hope that we have all sort of leaned into that fact that the role that we can play is a positive one, and that we are in charge of our actions and the example that we set. So,
well, thank you, Laura. I was really concerned when your images didn't show up, and about 2/3 of the way through most of them started to show up. But
I'm happy to share the PowerPoint, like I said.
Okay.
They're all there. I think it's just glitchy rural Wi-Fi in Stanley right now.
I think that's it, because some of the time lingered longer on a particular slide area, it eventually came up. So, so thank you for your wholehearted willingness to keep on giving your presentation despite the technological obstacle. And thank you for a fascinating presentation. That was excellent.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everyone coming. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and this talk will be posted on our website. After I send the video out, it'll be posted on our website. So anybody could watch it 24/7. So that'll be excellent. So thank you again so much.
I appreciate it, you guys. Thanks so much for coming.